This is the Wholesome Reader here, continuing with Chapter 8 of Father to Nobody's Children, The Girls' Village. Until 1871, there was no thought of romance in Bernardo's life. He was just too busy. Then he met Cerie Louise Elmsley. Miss Elmsley was the daughter of a wealthy businessman in Richmond, southwest of London. She had grown up in luxury and was spoiled as only a rich man can spoil a child. She was educated by private tutors, and her every desire was granted. Her religious education, however, was not considered important. Her family rarely attended church, and Sundays were usually spent in social activities. At the age of 18, however, through the witness of the great philanthropist Lord Radstock and the evangelist F.B. Meyer, she gave her heart to the Lord and changed completely. Work with poor children in a ragged school in Richmond soon replaced her social activities. Like Dr. Bernardo, she was a great organizer and put all her energy into her work. In the fall of 1871, Miss Elmsley organized a tea meeting for the poor children in Richmond. Having heard of Dr. Bernardo's success at similar activities, she invited him to come and speak. Bernardo was impressed with her ability to manage such a large event, and she admired the way his message kept the boys' attention. When they happened to meet the next day at the train station, Bernardo began to realize that his interest in her was more than just professional, and Miss Elmsley found herself strangely attracted to this gifted man. Bernardo was so busy he had no time to follow up on his interest, however. It was 18 months before they met again, also by accident, at a funeral. This time, Bernardo took decisive steps, and within a few days they were engaged. 4 weeks later, in June of 1873, they were married at a huge church in London, large enough to handle the crowd of well-wishers. This was followed by a 6-week honeymoon, but Bernardo made sure he took some of his paperwork along on the trip. Marriage opened new doors to Bernardo, doors that he had been longing to enter. Many of the boys in his orphanage had little sisters, and they begged Bernardo to take them in. In addition, Bernardo had seen some of the girls in his nighttime searches, but had been unable to help them. In Victorian London, it would have been improper for an unmarried man to take in girls. Now that his wife was working beside him, Bernardo had the freedom to rescue homeless children of both sexes. Friends who knew the couple's desire to start a home for girls went to work on a plan. By the time the Bernardos returned from their honeymoon, their desire was a reality. Mossford Lodge, an estate in the London suburb of Barkingside, had been donated, along with the funds to pay for renovations. The newlyweds moved in, and by October were ready to receive their first 12 girls. Within a year, the number had grown to 50. But things were not going well. Some of the children's earlier lives had been appalling. One girl had tried to commit suicide twice. Another had filled a baby's mouth with sand, and then sat on its face. These and other girls were housed in barrack-style buildings and were made to conform to a rigid schedule. Needless to say, it was difficult to keep order. But the true nature of the situation only came to light one evening as Bernardo overheard two of the girls talking. The conversation was filthy, and Bernardo realized with a shock that in what we thought was our happy little Christian home, the girls were being trained in sin, because the girls were being housed in barracks. They didn't receive the supervision and adult influence they needed. The older girls were teaching the younger ones the things they learned on the street. Bernardo was completely disillusioned. I was made to feel, as I listened with horror, that probably I had done harm, not good. With no other place to turn, he sought God in prayer. I told our Father I was willing to give it all up at once and acknowledge I had been in the wrong. With that, my peace of mind was restored. He knew that God did not want him to quit, but he also knew the answer had not yet come. With the problem still weighing heavily on his mind, he went to bed and began to dream. In the middle of the night, Bernardo sat up abruptly in bed and called to his wife, "Sri, Sri, it has been revealed to me how to deal with our girls." Then he quoted Psalm 68:6, "God setteth the solitary in families," and checked his Bible to be sure he had quoted it correctly. Finally, he explained his dream to his bewildered wife. In his dream, he explained he saw a beautiful cottage with a light shining in its window. As he peeked in, he saw a motherly-looking woman reading from the Bible, surrounded by several young girls. As he looked closer, he realized the girls were children from his home, but their faces had lost the hard, cold look he was so familiar with. Obviously, the woman was having a wonderful influence on these girls. Then he overheard the Bible passage she was reading. "God setteth the solitary in families." "Siri, this is a revelation," he exclaimed to his wife. "God means that our girls should live in family cottages with loving mothers to supervise their homes." Immediately the next morning, Bernardo wrote to a Christian magazine that had often supported his fundraising efforts. With an excitement that came from a sense of God's leading, Bernardo outlined the plan for a girls' village, consisting of dozens of cottages and a house mother for every 15 or so girls. However, days went by with no response to the appeal for donations. This was unusual, and it rocked Bernardo's faith in the new scheme. Was his dream just the result of an overactive imagination? Confused and uncertain, he decided to take some time off by attending some religious meetings being held in Oxford. On the way to Oxford, Bernardo shared the train trip with a friend of his, a Christian brother he described as a man of prayer, a man of faith, a man whose very face told you something of the peace of God which reigned within. Bernardo's face told a story as well, and his friend could see he was troubled. "How is your work going on?" he asked. And Bernardo told him the story of the cottage idea and the lack of response from his usually dependable donors. After a period of thought, Bernardo's friend asked, "If God shows you that your scheme is too large, are you prepared to give it up?" A good question. Bernardo had never looked at it that way before. "I suppose," he thought, "if God is not with me in this plan, it would be best if it didn't succeed." "Yes," he told his friend, "I am quite prepared." "Then let us kneel down right here and commit your case to God," his friend replied. "Let us ask him, if it be his will, to show you clearly, before you leave Oxford, whether you should go on with this idea or turn back." The two men knelt down right there on the train and laid the problem before the Lord. On arriving at Oxford, Bernardo and his friend parted company, but agreed to meet the next morning for breakfast. Bernardo was getting dressed the next morning when there was a knock at his hotel room door. Thinking it was the bellboy with some hot water for washing, he said, "Come in." A man stuck his head in the door. He was obviously just getting dressed himself, and his hair was still uncombed. "Is your name Bernardo?" "Yes." "You're the one thinking of building a village for cottages for little girls?" Yes, Bernardo answered in surprise. "Have you got any cottages yet?" No, not yet." "Well, put me down for the first one. Have a good day." And with that, the man was gone. Throwing on the rest of his clothes, Bernardo rushed down the corridor, caught the man by the arm, and persuaded him to come back to the hotel room and tell his story. It turned out that the man and his wife were mourning the loss of their daughter. When they read about the cottage idea, they decided to pay for one of the cottages in memory of their dead child. Later, he heard that Bernardo was staying in the same hotel, decided on the spur of the moment to let the doctor know of their donation. Bernardo spent some time praying with the donor and thanking God for the answer to his prayer. With a light heart, he went down to meet his friend for breakfast. Before he even had a chance to say anything, his friend looked at his face and quoted Isaiah 65:24. It shall come to pass that before you call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. After that initial donation, other funds came in to provide for several of the cottages. The girls' village was built in the community of Ilford, and the number of cottages grew with each passing year. The cottage method was such a success that eventually 40% of the children Bernardo rescued were girls. Nowadays, the cottage method is a standard practice in homes for girls, and for boys as well. Those who run today's children's homes might be surprised at Bernardo's doubts about the success of his proposal. And that's the end of chapter 8.